Hi, David Bizard here, and you are watching PowerTec 10. Just as a reminder, this is the channel that gives you the griff straight on. We don't tolerate BS, we don't tolerate bad products, and we promote the heck out of those products that are good. Now this issue, and it will go by in that corner there, is going to be the first of our road test features. It will be of a vehicle that I subsequently bought. What was it? An Ecoboost Mustang. Now let me tell you where it all started. A friend of mine, who's also a friend of this channel, and you've seen before, Silmore Clark, turned up at the house with a rental Mustang convertible, 2021 that would have been. Let me tell you now, that car looked gorgeous sitting in my driveway. So I asked him if I could have a quick drive in it and see what it went like. Sure, hands me the keys and off we go for a short drive. And it was just a short, maybe 5 miles. But the road leading to the house has got a straight about 800 yards long. And I gunned it down this straight. Went pretty good. When I got to the house, I said to Silborn, well, what is this, a V6? Feels like it. Open the hood. Nope, it's turbo 4. That did surprise me. It certainly went as if it had a 6-cylinder engine in it of around, say, 230 to 250 inches. I did not immediately perceive any turbo lag, and I thought to myself, wouldn't mind one of these. That's when I got the urge to buy one. Not because of just that initial drive, but because it satisfied a whole load of other situations for me. One of them was polyquad. Now you may wonder what polyquad is. Let me stop right there. Now what I need to do here is to give you a little bit of my background. This is the first road test that you are going to read, and my approach to it is a little different to the norm. First off, I don't criticize something unless I know I can do better. Not many motoring journalists can design a car from the ground up. I've been a consultant to several companies on the design of their car, and I've designed parts and engines for my clients. One of my big projects was for Chrysler, a turbo motor, back in the 70s. And let me tell you, it passed emissions and it went like a scalded cat. It could easily outpace, on twisty roads, a Lamborghini of that time. Now that's not bad. The car was capable of making about 300 horsepower at the wheels. Wasn't going to be sold like that, but it only weighed 1,900 pounds. So 300 at the wheels, 1,900 pounds. That's almost like a Mustang having 600 at the wheels, certainly 550. So I'm coming at this from the point of view of looking at it from the car designer's point of view as well as the end user. Why? Because I've walked in the shoes of both parties, and it's the only well-balanced way to come to valid conclusions about the vehicle we are testing. Very often people who are reviewing the Ecoboost Mustang make a comparison between this vehicle and its much more expensive sibling, the Mustang GT. My contention is that this is not truly a valid comparison. If you have a budget of $30,000 you can't make a comparison between a $30,000 car and a car costing at least 11 grand more that falls within the realms of reality. It's more a wishful thinking deal. What we should be doing here is saying, well, I have a $30,000 budget. What's the best bang for the buck I can get as somebody who's a performance enthusiast? And of course, that's the person that I'm addressing here mostly, but not solely. But we'll get to that down the road. What we should be doing here, as my best guess, is making a comparison between this and a $30,000 or thereabouts Camaro V6. Now then, that is a comparison where we entertain reality, not wishful thinking. So let me just make a few comments on this. I've only had a very short drive in a V6 Camaro. I was very impressed with the way it went for the money. It was a nice car. And I've put it on my list of one of the cars I should be testing really early on in this series. However, here's my take on the situation. When we buy a car, we're going to buy what best suits our wants and needs. Now, here's the situation for me. The Camaro and the Mustang would have been pretty much a tie, but for two major factors: looks and a turbo. Now, why is that? Simple. The Mustang, in my opinion, is the better looking of the two cars. That's not to say that the Camaro is not a good looking car. It is. But the Mustang has it for me. The second thing is turbo. I have had very good experience with turbo motors, especially when I've done the work myself. I know my original turbo stuff was way better than anything that was out there at the time. Almost no turbo lag, huge horsepower numbers, great on emissions, and good gas mileage. What more can you ask for? Now then, this turbo Mustang, we've only just tapped into the fact that it's got a turbo on it. If I apply my 4-valve turbo knowledge to this car, it makes an awesome project car. So that tipped the scales for me. I'm going to show you in subsequent features down the road how I turned this, what is a pretty healthy street car, into something which is devastating to anything that GM is putting out at a similar price, and I'm including a Corvette there. So basically what I will have is the performance, at least in a straight line, of something equivalent to a Corvette, but I've still got 4 seats. I'll still be able to use it as a daily driver, and I'll be able to do track days with it. Now that fits my needs. I want you to bear that in mind as we go through this, because some of you might not be interested in track days. Some of you may not be interested in hopping it up, or only minorly hopping it up. Some of you may not like the looks of it as well as you like the Camaro, then you should be looking at that car. But what we're going to do here is now look at the potential of this EcoBoost Mustang to satisfy your needs, and that includes everything from the performance enthusiast who wants to modify their car, right to the performance enthusiast that wants something off the shelf. My wife's like this. She's got a Malibu. She's had this Malibu now for, I don't know, 10 years. Loves it. Has only one complaint. It's shy of about 100 horsepower. If it wasn't for that, I couldn't have pried her out of that car. Now she's going to keep it. But I need this Mustang to be totally acceptable to her. Maybe not this one, because I've already told the guy I bought this car off, get ready for another order, because I want to start on a Mark II version of this hopped up. But anyway, let's get to it. This will be the test to put things into perspective so that you can decide whether or not this vehicle is for you. Now, I suspect Ford's criteria for the design philosophy of this car was to get people who want a sporty car with $30,000 to burn to buy a Ford. How well did they do? I think they nailed it pretty damn good. Maybe not perfectly, but pretty damn good. They got me, and I am super critical. So there's a point in their favor right there. Just for something a little different, let's make some historic comparisons. Like many people, when I was a youngster, I wanted an E-Type when they came out. How well does our Mustang compare with, say, a later model 4.2 litre E-Type? Simple. It whoops it on just about every aspect. It's faster in a straight line with the speed limiter off. It will out-accelerate an E-Type with 4 people in it. And better yet, it will out-corner and out-handle an E-Type. Now let me tell you something about E-Type handling. It's not that good, right? What we've got here is something which, if I were to do a quick analysis of the handling, which is something which is always very nondescript. You can't put a number on it. Not like cornering, braking, and acceleration. But the handling is akin to a Mini. Now, those of you who've driven Minis will know these things handled so predictably, it was unreal. On a tight, twisty track, a Mini would outperform a Ferrari. How well does our Mustang compare with a Mini? Initially at least, and I haven't tried it out on a road course, it handles like a Mini that weighs about a ton more. Of course, it has a ton more power to compensate, but yes, handling was very good. Now, I know there are criticisms of the suspension of the Mustang, and they're very valid, but the design of the suspension as it comes from the factory has to meet more criteria than just your handling as a, in quotes, racer or even a pseudo racer. It has to deal with noise, vibration, and harshness. NVH. That is a very difficult criteria to get around without causing a problem somewhere else. How well have Ford managed to do that? Let's put it this way. I don't think I could have done a better job. At least not from the perspective that I'm looking at here. On the limit, sure, that lack of, or that reduced noise and vibration inside the car is paid for, but you get the benefits of it 100% of the time, whereas the negative aspects probably only crop up like 0.1% of the time. Good trade-off. Not perfect, but a very good trade-off, and that's what engineering is all about. Still on the subject of handling, let me tell you about an interesting conversation I had with Chief Engineer Jason at Vorslag Motorsports. Just in case you've never heard of them, just go into YouTube and just put Vorslag Motorsports in the search engine and you'll get some videos that they've done. They had a very good video on brakes. Take notice of it if you're a circuit racer. Anyway, on with my story. Jason gave me some very interesting information that showed that the engineers concerned with the suspension on this Mustang were on the ball. Now, I'm not saying they did something unique, but they did something that utilized, to an extent, the fact that in isolating the rear suspension subframes from the body to cut down the noise and vibration and harshness, they did it in such a way that they acquired a situation to their advantage in another area. Now, we all know that subframes will move if they're rubber mounted. Mustang's no different there, but they designed it to move in such a way that it actually makes the car safer. Now, here's how Jason described it. He was in a situation where they could determine how much the wheels moved in relation to the body. And what he told me was that as the car reaches the limit in cornering, the rear subframe moves such that it applies more caster to the back wheels, so that it tends to turn. So as the car tends to drift out on the corner, the subframe motion tends to turn the car in, thus making it very docile at the limit. Great stuff. So far, this is what I'm experiencing, although up until my conversation with Jason, that the reason for it was not, to me at least, evident. Here's the McPherson Strut S550, that's Ecoboost, front suspension. I wanted to show you this for two reasons. One, it was one of very few illustrations I could find for the front suspension of our subject here. The second was the site that I found it on. Now then, I was on this site, I'll put it up in the corner there, for about 2 minutes before I decided to sign up. I would suggest, if you're a Mustang person and you want some very useful tech from people who seem to have a good grasp of what's going on, then just go and sign up on it. Well, at least for the moment, we'll wrap up on suspension here. Just to sum it all up though, we can say that the suspension is a very well developed compromise between comfort, road holding and handling. It is as good as any car you'll find out there on the market, and better than most. And in closing on this subject, let me just remind you, we are dealing with the most basic Mustang suspension here. This is the Ecoboost, not the premium Ecoboost with the adjustable shocks. Anyway, on to the next subject. My first reaction to the brakes was that they felt very confidence-inspiring. However, it turns out that things aren't quite as they seem here. Yes, the car is very sure-footed in street conditions. When I say street, I mean on the road. But I'm going to be using this car as a track day car as well. And so one of my first moves was to check with Vorslag to see what the brakes would deal with. And here I found things, from my perspective, a little disappointing. Not only did the Vorslag guys say that the brakes won't take much of a beating on a road course for a track day car, but also, according to one factory engineer who was involved in the development of this vehicle, said they were not designed for track day use and would not last very long. What they were designed for was to give good stopping from a number of high-speed stops on the road, but not the beating that you'd expect on a racetrack. Now, it turns out, and again, this is from Vorslag, and I think their opinion is probably close to 100% accurate here, and that's from their track testing, that the biggest culprit is probably the disc itself. Not that it's too small, but its design is not, how shall I say, conducive to track use, but it is to the requirements for road use that Ford were seeking. What this means is if I'm going to use this as a track day car, or any of you are, then one of your first moves will be brakes. Not engine, not suspension, brakes. Now let's move on to steering. What we find here is that the Ecoboost, along with its premier partner, has multiple settings, selectable through your dashboard knobs and dials and things. Now, it's got 3 settings: light, track, and comfort. And I believe they go in form of, the lightest is comfort, the next lightest is lightest, and the final one is heavier, and that's for the track. Now I need to make a point here. This is probably what most of you will like to have: a light setting for the street and a heavier one for the track. And I'll tell you why that is. Because when you get on the track, you pump adrenaline. And that heavy steering now seems light. Now, one of the things I established when I was doing a lot of medical stuff on the track, especially in '89 when I was all plumbed up and wired with heart monitors and stuff like this, is that one of the things I don't do is pump very much adrenaline. It would appear that the amount of adrenaline that my body pumps under stressful situations is teeny weeny amount, not normal. Now, this does have its advantages. One of them is that it's easier to stay cool, calm, and collected. And I've been known for that. My heart rate goes up very minimally in a life-threatening situation, which means that I can look brave, but I get scared real easy when a wall's coming up at 90 miles an hour and I know it's going to hurt. From my perspective, the light steering I found to be very good, except for one thing. It had a slight tramlining effect. Now, this could be the tires, the road, or whatever, but I noticed, how shall I say, it wasn't quite as precise as I wanted it to be. But I think it's not a steering problem, it's probably a tire problem. Now, I'm going to try it on heavy and see how well that copes with it. But I'll talk about that down the road. Moving on to the final drive. In earlier Mustangs, that would have been the rear axle, but we have an IRS here, so we're going to move on to the final drive. That can be had in 3 different ratios when you order the car. That would be, I don't recall them offhand, but I'll put them up in the corner there. The other thing is you've got 2 limited slip diffs that you can choose from. Okay, let's talk limited slip differentials. Now, in a high performance car that's driven even just kind of street rapid, a limited slip diff can be pretty much a big player in the game when it comes to handling. When it gets wet, even more so. Now, the limited slip diff that Ford used, and that's the traction lock diff, picture up here, wherever, and that's a very cost-effective diff for Ford to install, and it works mostly by friction discs pressed out with springs, but it can wear out. The fortunate thing is it's easily rebuildable, and it can be, what's the best description I can use here, shimmed up, packed up to give more lockup or less as required. Now, I really need to drive my Mustang in the wet to give you a good all-around impression of how it performs, because wet road testing a diff is the way to do it. If it doesn't handle in the wet, forget it. Now, so far, I've done a couple of hard accelerations out of a tight turn going uphill, and the diff kind of worked pretty good. Normally, with an open diff, it would just burn rubber from the inside wheel. Well, it did get a bit of wheel spin, but it was very minimal. However, that isn't the situation that they're covering most. It's wet road handling. The other diff you can get, which is about 2.5 times more money, but it's an option, is the torsion diff. I believe one of my box body Mustangs has a torsion diff in it. Now, I hate to be vague on this, but I haven't seen the car for about 4 years, maybe more, and my brain surgery is such as I can't remember what we did with the axle. I know it was pretty extensive. We put negative camber into it. We redid this, that, and the other. Whole story all in its own right. But I seem to remember the torsion diff, which by the way is not a clutch differential, it's a gear differential. And I think that's the one that I preferred in the wet, but we'll have to see on that. Now for the transmission, and here we arrive at a subject which for me is presenting, as usual, some difficulties. Let me explain. The great fun arena for me is a road course. Now, racing an automatic car on a road course is, or rather has been, an automatic disqualification for any performance value of any success. Now, what is the problem with an auto on the track? Simple. It can't look into the future to know when to downshift for a corner. So downshifting is an issue. But I selected a 10-speed transmission. Now don't forget, this test car is also one that I now own. So why did I select the 10-speed instead of the 6-speed manual? Well, 2 reasons. I know with a paddle shifter, you can downshift the transmission and it will auto match the RPMs at the downshift. So that in itself removes the, how shall I say, disadvantage of an automatic transmission. You're not bothered with having to deal with the clutch and things like this. The other aspect of why I chose the transmission is that it has 10 speeds. And the first gear should give a pretty good launch. The automatic transmission has several modes of operation. These are selected by the toggle switch, it's a photograph of it over there, where you toggle it through the selection, and that is normal, sport, track, and drag strip. I think I've got them all there. Oh, and snow and ice, right? And that tells the computer different points at which it needs to shift, different shift harshnesses, and the point at which it downshifts as you're braking. Now I did notice in the sport mode that when the transmission downshifts, it does so very gently. Now the reason I didn't like to downshift with an automatic is that the extra braking it puts on the rear wheels when you're already at maximum braking disturbs the balance of the car. Consequently, you can end up spinning. If you try to avoid doing that by braking less harshly so that when it downshifts, it just moves it up into a area that you could have got with the brakes, but you didn't go to because it wouldn't allow for the drag that the transmission causes. Now, what that means, if you allow for it, you now have to brake earlier and less aggressively. That's not me. I brake in the last foot that it's possible to brake and survive the corner. So that's why I'm a manual transmission lover. Now, what have we got here is an automatic transmission, which supposedly should do everything at the track that I normally do manually. Well, don't have a definitive answer for that yet, but I can say that so far I'm very pleased with the transmission. When I get another Mustang, which I will be, and it will be a turbo 4-cylinder, not one of the V8s, I will get it with a paddle shifter, so that now I have the next best thing to a clutchless manual transmission. So consider that before you go for those manual shifters. And here's the other thing. With the lock-up clutches on these deals, the power loss through the transmission isn't that much different to what a manual transmission is. So I think the manual transmission makes around about 8 or 10 horsepower more at the wheels. But if somebody knows better, I would stand corrected there. I think at this point I should tell you a few things that I did before actually purchasing this Mustang. And the reason for that is that I don't want to appear biased when it comes to the road test part. Now, I didn't just up and buy this Mustang. I knew of somebody who was a really good Mustang expert in the sales department of a local Ford dealer. I subsequently found out that this gentleman was actually the world's #1 salesperson of Roush Mustangs. So I went along and saw this gentleman, and sure enough, he had owned many Mustangs and was a true enthusiast. He didn't sell you a Mustang. You know, I think I said this before. He was going to convince you of a way of life. Let me just introduce you to this character. Right, so here we go. This is Lyle at Tyndall Ford in Gastonia, North Carolina.
Hey, Lyle.
Hey, David, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Come in to talk about Mustangs.
I love doing
Surprise. Anyway, I've got some questions.
Okay.
Lyle, the Mustang that I got from you is just, I'm overwhelmed with it. And I've got to say that I'm doing a road test on it, and I've got to be so careful that I'm not being biased, because I've fallen in love with the car. Literally. Right, and I don't usually do that, but just driving it home, I thought, what a great car.
I think the word's wow.
Yes, I think that's right. Now, one of the things I want to put over to people is the fact that if they're going to buy a Mustang, they're not just making a car purchase, they're making also, in essence, a kind of way of life purchase.
That's correct.
I mean, your interests in life center around your Mustangs up there, right? I mean, you've owned Mustangs for...
Since 1967, when I got my first one.
Right, there we go. So the thing is when somebody's in the market or thinks they're in the market for a Mustang, they need to go to a Mustang enthusiast at the dealership if they're going to buy a new one. That's the idea that I'm putting over. Now, give me your thoughts on that. You've been a Mustang owner forever and a day, right? And it's not just a car for you, it's a
passion, it's a lifestyle.
Yes.
You know, I got my first Mustang in 1967, and there's never been a month in my life that I haven't made a payment on a Mustang. So I've had a long time from 1967 to 2023.
And that proves that Mr. Ford must have done something right.
It definitely proves that I love Mustangs. Yes. I promise you, Mr. Ford, He has a great automobile, but I think the Mustang is the one nameplate in American muscle that has been here and never stopped. And that's a great thing about the Mustang. And you're right, it's a passion. It's not a choice that, hey, I need a car to drive. It's I want to buy a Mustang.
Right. Well, anyway, the thing is that what I want to do is thank you for spending the time with me sorting out what I wanted. I know that I'm a fussy son of a bitch, right? And I'll agree to that. But you just hung in there and spent the time necessary to get me what I wanted, and I'm 100% pleased.
Oh, that is great to hear, because that's my number one goal is, since I don't sell cars at a car lot, I only sell Roush for Roush Industries and the Mustangs. And I tell you what, it's great to see another, what I call a Roush-keteer, a Mustang-holic.
Yeah.
And you know, we're all together in the same thing. We love our vehicles. The passion we have for these cars is second to none. And they're just doggone fun. They are.
I can't think of anything I need to add to that, right? So, but let's wrap it up there. Now, you know I'm going to need another Mustang, so what I want you to do is start looking for one.
I will.
Right? Like I said, it can be yellow like yours, or the same red. I don't mind.
Okay.
The red that I've got when it's out in the sunshine is brilliant.
And you want a coupe this time, correct?
I want exactly the same body style, right?
Okay. Now there's my Mustang right there, David. That's one of my many, and that's bodacious. That is a great track car, 2015 model. That's my baby. Go ahead.
Just to make sure that I kept this bias under control and was being fair, I thought what I would do is check out reputable testers and see what they had. Now, I didn't cherry pick this, but here's one from Test Driven TV. This YouTube site is a pretty good deal for getting honest tests. Here's what their guy had to say about it. Now, I'll briefly just put in the piece that's relevant.
But when it comes to the steering and the suspension, it is tight as can be. Now that I'm on the more smoother portions of my favorite mountain road here, I have to say this car is a pure joy. This thing handles so well. It's so refined. It really is exactly what Mustang enthusiasts for decades have tried to achieve.
Well, here I am, arriving home from the dealership. I parked the car. It's now got 38 miles on it. And there it stays for the next 3 weeks because I'm too busy to drive my new Mustang. After 3 weeks of being parked, I got time to drive the car. Yes, it confirmed my first impressions. However, it also confirmed something else. There's an awful lot of BS spread about these Mustangs. These 0 to 60 in 4-point-something seconds. No. I think they read that off another channel. One that made it up at that. Also, I'm a bit leery about the quarter-mile times. Now, I haven't had time to do all these, but I need to shorten up this video, so what I'm going to do here is take the car to the drag strip, probably Rockingham, and get the numbers for real. Also, we'll look at things that may not be, how shall I say, conducive to a quarter-mile time. I can reiterate what our tester at Test Driven TV said, and the car does handle very nicely, and I've said that earlier on. Now, what I'm going to do now is tell you all the things that I don't like. The first thing I really don't like is having these Mustangs referred to in a derogatory manner as a rental car. Now think about this. Would a rental car company make hundreds of purchases of an unreliable car? No. Would a rental car like to buy cars that would attract customers? Yes. Would a rental car like to have the opportunity to supply something that is fun to drive? Yes. Now, isn't that all the things that we want? So, you could say the rental car companies are, in a way, confirming our view of the Mustang in terms of excitement and reliability. So, thank you, rental car companies. You've just helped me make my point. Well, I must admit, in my opinion, that the styling looks good, but in an effort to make an appealing look to the car, there's a few engineering, how shall I say, shortcomings come about here. Let's take a look at the hood vents. In many tests, they'll say, oh, they're functional. No, that's only a little bit of the story. They're about 98% cosmetic and about 2% functional. The amount of air that can get out of those vents, especially with the obstruction caused by the underhood sound deadening, is minimal. Now, that's a shame. The intercooler needs all the air it can get going through it. And I'm sure the radiator would work better if air could get out of the hood. We need something like that by that wide, or area. The area of it needs to be at least as much as the radiator grill opening. The benefits of having a bigger air vent in the hood is that A, keeps everything cooler under the hood, which is exactly what we need with this car, and B, cuts front end lift. And if placed in the right place, it can actually reduce the aerodynamic drag. Here's an example out of Vorslag's workshop. Now this looks very similar, and it may be, I didn't check, to the Shelby one, but this is the kind of thing they use on their road racer. That's what we should target. Now it is possible to get carbon fiber and glass fiber hoods with this type of design, so we're not stuck having to accept that standard hood. Anyway, let's move on. There's a driver safety measure. The driver's door mirror did not reveal the possibility of traffic in the blind spot very well. Yes, sure, it's got a blind spot warning, which is a good job actually, but it could do, in my opinion, with a mirror with just a slight bit of curvature on it so that we get a better view of what's coming down the road. You know, it could be something coming fast down the road that doesn't show up in the blind spot warning deal soon enough to get the job done. So, Mr. Ford, just for me, can you make that mirror just a little bit curved, right? That could save lives. There's no doubt about the fact that this car, bearing in mind that it's in the daily driver type category, goes like a rocket ship. Sure, there's plenty of cars out there, if you just look at the numbers, that will go quicker, but you won't come across them very often. It'll take about 100 stops at the traffic lights before you find somebody alongside that's quicker. Now, that said, we pose the question, are the brakes up to it? Well, yes and no. Here's my take on it. The brakes will stop you, as far as an emergency stop goes, right on time. But if you were to take it to the track, those brakes wouldn't hold up very long. So for a daily driver, the brakes are okay unless you happen to spend every day coming off a mountain with lots of turns and a few quick straights, etc. As far as I'm concerned, one of the early things I'm going to do to my Mustang is to put on better brakes, especially lighter discs and lighter calipers. Now let's move on to the wheels. Oh, by the way, it's that rear brake I'm showing here. The front brakes are a bit bigger, but they still need to be better than they are for what I want. That is track day capability. Still, we can upgrade those for not cheap, but not maybe as much money as some people might think. Now, let's go on to the wheels. I'm not overwhelmed with the styling on these wheels. They're okay, but basically, since the rest of the car looks so good, maybe I'm expecting too much. So what I've done is I've already researched wheels, and I'm going to go, I think, with American Mag 5-spoke polished wheels, the old style, like I got on one of my older Mustangs. I've got 2 other Mustangs apart from this. Now, also these wheels are heavy. Now I did measure them and take the weight of the wheel and tire and then subtract the weight of the tire from it, which I found out from a tire store. But for the life of me, I don't know where I put the piece of paper I wrote it on. I think they're around about, it was either 27 or 29 pounds, I think. Well, the American Mags are about 9 to 10 pounds lighter than that, so that's good. And that's with 2 inches more width. So if we were looking at the same width of wheel, it would be about 11 or 12 pounds lighter. So with the brakes and the wheels, I can lighten up the unsprung weight on the car quite a bit. Probably going to amount to something like 160 pounds by the time I've done all the corners. Now, let's see what else is on the agenda. Now, I think I mentioned it earlier on, but one of my peeves here is the sound of the exhaust. Don't like it at all. And I guess I'm not alone, because so many exhaust kits are sold. Now, a lot of those that are sold to guys who want it noisier. I'm not in that league. I don't need to show my car off. It's what I want as a very fast cruiser that is not intrusive into my cabin space. So what I would like is to see this tone much deeper and more authoritative, but less noise. And it's doable. As I said earlier, I've had a lot of experience designing mufflers, and I think I know which brand of muffler I'm going to put on, but that's for down the road. And while I'm at it, I'm going to put the bigger downpipe on, because that's where the horsepower is. The downpipe will have a cat on. So with the bigger downpipe and the mufflers, I should see 10 or 12 more rear wheel horsepower. Not a lot at this stage, but that's in readiness for what I'm going to do to the engine down the road. No leather seats for me. I want something that I don't slide around in on the corners. remember earlier on I said there was no way that this Mustang could do a 0 to 60 in 4 point something. Well, proves that it's not quite true. But my guess is you will never see a 0 to 60 in 4.9. That's not because the engine couldn't propel that car to 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds, or maybe even slightly less. But a combination of factors won't allow it to do so. Now, how fast did we go? Well, the fastest time that Andy and I saw was 5.11 seconds. That's with both of us in the car. But that was under slightly unusual circumstances. Now, let me explain. Here's the problem, and it's not intuitive. If you've got too much grip, the engine cannot pick up enough RPM because of lack of wheel spin to get into a boost range that gives it a lot of torque. So here's what happens. You nail the throttle on a grippy road, as is the one you've just seen, and the tires instantly grip, and it pulls the engine down to about 2200 RPM. That's just shy of where all the torque is. If we add to that a 3.15 final drive, the launch is not very good. Our typical 60 foot times were in the 2.2 to 2.3 times. That is pathetically slow for a car with this performance capability. If you get on a road which is slightly slippery for the first few feet of your start, what happens is the engine comes up to maybe 3000 RPM where the boost is well on song, and so is the torque, and it leaves a lot quicker. For our 5.11 run, we actually had some wheel spin to start with. The engine came up in RPM, and we recorded a 2.1 60 foot. Bottom line here is this car is capable of a low 13-second quarter mile, but not in the trim it's in now. We did try on a piece of disused road, a quarter mile run, and it wasn't quite long enough for us to do a whole quarter mile. But we did record a 13.75 at just a tad under 100 miles an hour. Given the fact we're going to Rockingham, I predict that if the weather is similar, that we will run probably a 13.6 at right on 100 miles an hour. But that's my estimation. We'll see how good that is in the next issue. So, what would be the fix for this? Well, I am sure the tuners have got some tricks up their sleeve for this, and no doubt somebody's gonna let me know. I'm investigating Cobb at the moment, but what we really need to do here is to put a lower final drive in, but that's for the next issue, right? I am convinced that without touching the engine, other than the exhaust and the cold air, that I can get this car down to close to 13 flat for the quarter mile at probably 105, 106 miles an hour. And for not much money, way short of what a GT costs. And remember, all the mods I'm doing to it will have very little effect on the miles per gallon, and I'll explain all that. Now, my overall impression, pretty good. What did Andy think of it? Well, take a look at his channel. He's going to tell you what he thinks of the car with his brief drive. It was an eye-opener for him. This is a guy that's been into performance vehicles all of his life, and he's been the proud owner of Mustangs in the past, performance ones. But this one completely took him by surprise. I think that if you're in the market for a Mustang, go and find yourself a dealer that has a salesperson who is an expert on Mustangs, and take one out for a drive. Then make a judgment. I'm glad I bought this one, but let me be sure that you understand that I don't think that this is the only car that would have suited me like this. It just happens that it was the right car at the right time. I'm still anxious to drive some of GM's offerings here because I know they've got some pretty good vehicles. But anyway, that's it for now. So thank you for watching, and I hope you dial into the next road test, which will probably be in a month or so's time. Thank you.